Thank you so much. I appreciate it, everybody. Yeah, so I am taking over the speaker role today, and I'll be giving a talk about getting traction with GitHub Actions, which is one of my favorite subjects. But before I jump into that, I wanted to give pretty much a catch up of what I've been doing for the past 9 months. And like so many other people, back in the summer, I watched this documentary called The Last Dance, and it was all about Michael Jordan. I stand by this one quote, which is Stan Lee, which is imagine every issue is someone's first issue in the context of comics. Stan Lee being the founder of Marvel Comics, and I watched this documentary and learned so much about the famed Michael Jordan, the superstar, if you will. And I also realized that we have some Gen Z watching this as well. You might not know Michael Jordan. This is a conference on 5 continents being streamed. But if I could just summarize Michael Jordan, he back in the war of 1995 between the Monstars, he actually single-handedly defeated, with a little help from Bill Murray, defeated the Monstars and saved Toontown. But that's really not what he did. He was actually a star baseball player for 13 months. No, I'm just kidding. No, Michael Jordan, he played baseball for a short amount of time, but he also did a bunch of other stuff. If you look at the next slide, he hosted SNL. He was a big superstar, hosted SNL. He also was best man for Bugs Bunny and Lola Bunny as well on the bottom right. You can see the image there. But he's done so much to get to his point of super fandom. In the keynote, I actually had this shoe right here, which is the Jordan 3 in the keynote. And this is a shoe that came out more like 15 years ago. Actually, I'm doing my math wrong. More than 15 years ago. But anyway, these are shoes that people still wear today. So his mark has been basically pressed in the entire sports arena, but also he sort of leveled up the game by actually bringing Nike into the forefront. And I bring up Michael Jordan because he is not only one of my favorite players, he's also a superstar. And as I mentioned before, I think of myself as the Beyonce of GitHub. I stand by that. I'm a Beyonce advocate. Not only am I a Beyonce advocate, I'm a developer advocate. These are all my handles. Everything else you need to know about me is right here, BWO on Twitter, BW on GitHub. Definitely check out my MySpace page that I built over there. And I bring this up because I like to go to bat for the Hive. Beyonce, she goes to bat for the Hive as well. She stands up with the lemonade. Y'all should watch that too as well. Also watch that show on Disney Plus too as well. That was that's pretty legit. But I digress. I'm going to move on from Beyonce and talk about what I really want to talk about, which is GitHub Actions. Now, GitHub Actions is a feature that most people at this point, like if you watch the keynote, if you watch any videos, if you leverage GitHub in the last year, you probably have seen this first and foremost. And it's really a tool to take your workflow to the next level. So I mentioned, like, if you're into DevOps, which this what the entire session today is about DevOps, like you could do that with GitHub Actions. And I think what a lot of people kind of think of GitHub Actions as is CI. And I even saw this in Twitter, hashtag GitHub Universe. Check out the Twitter feed there. Someone brought up with the continuous delivery features, like what does that mean for continuous integration? And I think they're sort of conflating everything into one, which is fine because that's what GitHub Actions is. And if you zoom back a bit, it's all about workflow automation, automating yourself to get back to the code. And I bring this up because when Jason Warner stood on stage a couple years ago at GitHub Universe, he presented Actions as a feature for developers to get back to what they want to do. So if you're constantly doing all this tedious checking in, like hitting up Slack, telling your coworkers to review your PRs, like you could automate all that stuff. And the beauty of this is that GitHub Actions basically gets you back to what you want to do, which is write code. And I mentioned this, and I mentioned my example of the pull request, but what you can do with Actions is so much beyond CI, because you can take those repetitive tasks that you do all the time just to get your workflow, up and running and moving along, chugging along, and making sure you're, killing it in the sprints. I messed up. Anyway, so I have an example, and my example, and I wrote a blog post about this actually. So if you go to dev.to and find myself, which is bdougie on dev, as I mentioned, I use those handles everywhere. I wrote up a blog post of how I do the automation piece of my workflow, and the automation workflow piece is around my storybook. So I had the pleasure of actually following up Angie and learning about Apple tools and how you do end-to-end testing. And she had mentioned briefly about checking your components. And one thing that I did with my sort of refresh of my project, this project I'll talk about in the next slide. I did a whole redesign. I actually learned how to use Figma and Sketch and all those other things. I'm not a designer by trade, but I wanted to basically build a new design, so I ended up leveraging Storybook. And the way I did this is every time I made a change to any component in my component folder structure, because I happen to be doing React, I wanted to update my design system. And my design system is here, and it's using Storybook. So this is design.opensauce.pizza. And again, I'm not a designer, so please don't critique my design here. But what I'm getting at is every time I made a change to any components in my design structure, I actually have an action that triggers a deployment, and then not only triggers a deployment, but also it only watches that folder structure. So again, that is detailed on the blog post. I can't really spend much more time on that. But what I wanted to focus on is the automation piece. I was able to not focus on how to get my components updated just for Storybook if they don't change the actual production site by just using GitHub Actions. One other thing that I also added too in my workflow is adding Lighthouse. Now, Jake Jarvis he has this Lighthouse action, and the one thing that I do for my deployments is I deploy to Netlify. And the reason why I chose this is that every time there's a Netlify deploy preview on my project, which is open source, I actually get an entire preview directly linked inside of my pull request, which is beautiful because I've been using this other action I built called Logify, which also brings my previews into the deployment logs first and foremost. I don't have an example about this in CD yet because it just launched yesterday. But what I like about this is that I get Lighthouse scores every time I open a PR. So if I have a PR from someone else, because this is an open source project, anybody else in the community, I actually can find out if I have like a degradation of my Lighthouse score or performance or accessibility right there in line with the PR. And when I talk about sort of identifying repetitive tasks, every time I open up a pull request, I want to make sure accessibility and performance do not go down. I want them to stay consistent or get better. So I bring that up because with the Lighthouse action, I can actually embed those Lighthouse scores within my action logs. So that way, not only in my action logs, but also in the PR comments. And it's all powered from this one action, which is beautiful. And like you're probably thinking, Lighthouse is already embedded in Chrome. Like you can just open up the Chrome tab and like just know what you're doing and check that before you merge the PR. And the thing is, I won't do that. I won't do that for anybody's PRs. I want this to be automated and get myself back to writing my own code and not have to do that for every time a PR is open up on my project. So I bring this up. Shout out to the artifacts too as well, like actually having the report in line inside of my logs as well. It's just a beautiful experience. Speaking of beautiful experience in basketball, which you didn't ask about basketball, but I'll continue down this path. Full court layups is a term that it was very prevalent when I was in high school playing basketball, where you have with basketball it's a 5-on-5 team. All right, so a lot of times there could be one superstar, kind of like a Michael Jordan, and they might just be more of like a ball hog, which Michael Jordan by far is not one. Well, he doesn't play anymore, so you can't really hog anything. But what I'm getting at is this term of full court layups is like one person would take the ball in, check it in, and then they would drive the ball all the way to the other end of the hoop. And the best way I can explain this is NBA Jam. So NBA Jam is not real basketball, but it's basically that. You just take it in and you slam dunk at the other end. It's an amazing game, amazing sport. Definitely, if you want to go back to the world of nostalgia, play some NBA Jam for sure. But if I could better explain this as well, I do have a basketball court here. So if you are familiar with basketball, let me just break it down. It's kind of like soccer, except you use your hands. But you have a court, you have two hoops on each side, and the goal is to basically get the ball in the opponent's hoop. So this is what a full court layup is. And I bring this up because there's a thing that you can do, which you can optimize to actually score points. And I think this is really what it comes down to when I talk about developer automation. And hopefully this will hit home soon. But I read this book last year, and it was all about hooponomics and Moneyball. And if you've never heard of either, there are definitely books out there. I don't have time to really break down that entire book, but watch the Brad Pitt movie. But they applied statistics directly to the game of basketball. So they found out if you shoot the ball from this point on the court, you have a 31% chance of the ball going in. Well, if you know that, then you can go ahead and optimize all your plays to basically drive to that point of the court. So this is my 5-person team of basketball. This is where generally, if I were running a play, I'd tell the team that basically these are your points of the court to stand in. So go there, and then that way people know where you're at, and then we can optimize to get the ball to where number 2 is at. So I bring this up because in the documentary in The Last Dance, I learned something really interesting, which I wasn't even aware of, which is this thing called the triangle offense. So the triangle offense basically it breaks down the game in a way that you're always going to have a triangle. So if I'm standing in a 1 point to the left of me and to the right of me, there'll always be somebody there, and hopefully, based on the game, the chance that's one of those people will be open. So then, I'm bringing this up because a lot of people think of Michael Jordan as like a superstar and a person who like to sort of transcended the game. And I think what really a lot of people miss is the amount of effort and practice he put into. He actually there's actually a book called The Power of Habit, and understanding like the habit of, if you know every single situation, like you want to play towards area 31, you'll know that always look at that point. And when that point becomes open, that's when you take your shot or you shoot your shot. So I bring this up because I'm talking about actions and GitHub action interactions. And I love when I get to talk about like the GitHub API and the stuff that GitHub's been working on. As a Beyonce advocate, developer advocate, is that GitHub is a bunch of primitives that sort of actions kind of combines and makes into one nice built feature. So some of the primitives I can that I leverage, and like these are sort of higher level primitives, but Probot and OctaKit. So OctaKit being the SDK for interacting with the API. This open source tool, definitely check it out if you've never heard of it. And then we have Probot, which is this sort of SDK to build GitHub apps. And what I love about this is when I was building lots of GitHub apps a couple years ago, is that my 0 to have something in production, the time it took was pretty low. Because all I had to know is what webhook I need to interact with. So in this example, I'm actually checking out the webhook for issues. And what I'm getting at is that I know there's going to be an interaction that I'm going to have, like whether it's reviewing pull request once a day, or if it's every time an issue's open, like check those. And I have even a better example coming up, which is GitHub Script. So GitHub Script is a combination of OctaKit and Probot combined into actions, which I love. It gives me the same sort of interactions I spent all that time on. And earlier this year, we had the GitHub Hackathon. The GitHub Hackathon is a project which was to encourage people to build GitHub Actions. I think. Well, not. I think you understand that, but I'm not thinking I know exactly what I'm talking about. Just trust me. But I bring this up because the GitHub Hackathon, we ended up powering a GitHub Actions hackathon on the back of Actions. So the entire backend database was a GitHub repo, which I love doing. I have kind of a trend that I kind of focused on in doing that. But this is GitHub Script. This is me actually doing the same thing I showed you in Probot previously and attaching that right into my YAML file. So I'm able to write JavaScript directly inside of a YAML to check to see if someone submitted a repo for approval. It then gets applied here. And then we have a bunch of actions that run checks to then like let us know if it should be featured on the homepage or if it should be pushed back and have them update it. And this is the way I did this is I actually had my mobile phone up and I would just apply a label to all PRs that were open to support this GitHub Action Hackathon. And it was beautiful because once I hit the feature tab or the featured label, they would just show up right on the homepage because we had all this the entire deployment process triggered with GitHub Actions. So it was a beautiful situation. And what I'm getting at is like I knew we wanted to have a process that we can, of a team of 3, we can actually power this entire Actions hackathon on the back of Actions in pull request. And we did that by just over optimizing for this area 31. So hopefully this is kind of hammering home and landing for y'all, but the focus is really find places where you can improve with GitHub Actions and then index for those. I bring this up because the number 23, which Jordan's number, 25 comes after 23, which is Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr is actually, during The Last Dance in that documentary, he was Michael Jordan's teammate. And he was sort of like a sharpshooter. He was kind of like really focused on getting to a point and making sure 3 points were shot in or the jump shot was positioned well for him. And I bring this up because Steve Kerr is now the coach of the Golden State Warriors. Golden State Warriors won the championship in, I believe, 2016, 2017, and 2018. I got those. I'm off by 1 year. It's 2015, 2016, 2018. But anyway, regardless, Steve Kerr actually coached an entire team to not only just optimize for Area 31, they optimized for a different place on the court. And it really was about the 3-point shot. Now, Again, I don't have time to go into the whole hooponomics, but I do encourage you to hit me up in the discussions, and we can talk. We can go back and forth. I'm also on BWO on Twitter. But on the court, the 3-point line is about 22 feet. In certain points, it's 23 feet, depending on what corner of the line you are. And what I'm getting at is that it's a harder shot, hypothetically. But if you think about the statistics, if I have 31% of the times I can have the shot go in at area 31, that's going to be roughly 0.62 points. But if I have a percentage of how many 3-point shots will go in, it'll be 1.6 points. So what we noticed back in 2015, 2016, the numbers of NBA games, they all went up. It's because a lot of teams started attempting bigger 3-point shots. And I can really nerd out about this stuff and about like how different tools and DevOps can really just elevate the game to the point where we're no longer worrying about whether or not we need to leverage this type of CSS or that type of CSS. We can all transcend and start focusing on the next level, and that's what the 3-point shot did for the game a couple years ago, and it's still doing today. But I digress. I'm here to talk about get action traction and getting action traction, and I want to bring up one more example, which is all about Hacktoberfest. And Hacktoberfest it's an event that happens once a year, powered by DigitalOcean and a couple other sponsors as well. And the focus there is around encouraging people to contribute to open source. And I bring this up because the project that I work on is open source. And the project I mentioned before is open source. And I knew there was going to be an influx of contributions coming in. So I have a script to basically assign people to issues, because what I want to do is I want less friction when people say, hey, Brian, I want to work on this project. How can I get started? Or is this still being worked on? Right away, I just say, let's just assign you to the issue, and then we'll chat. So the first thing I did is I wrote a script, and I applied that to a GitHub action. And I actually took the script from Pandas. So Pandas actually will be in a panel tomorrow. The creator of Pandas will be in a panel tomorrow. But they have a script where they have a bunch of bash, or a little bit of bash, a couple lines, and they apply that to a GitHub action. And I love this because I'm able to have anybody who comes into my project write a command called take, and then assign themselves an action. And it was a beautiful, elegant experience to the point where I was like, hey, I should use this on all my repos. So I then took my action and then made it open source and then applied it. And it's in a repo called take action. And then now anybody can go into my repo and assign themselves to an issue, and then we can have a conversation. So as soon as you've assigned an issue, again, area 31, I just know that you want to work on something. Let's get you assigned, and then let's have a conversation. And I ended up taking that and then adding a composite action. So taking that same bash, embedding it inside the YAML inside that repo, and now it's reusable for anybody on Marketplace. So I encourage you to check that out. And that's just one example. Again, I don't have time to go in all the examples, but just trying to really encourage you to take action and get action traction. And this is basically where I'm sort of applying it to my open source repo, where I'm only adding it just by pointing to my other repos as well. So again, all open source. Definitely check it out. I didn't go into detail of all these actions as well because I do have a YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that's going to flex for a second, but I do go into and break down a lot of these concepts and how I implement them in my projects. So especially take action, it's like a 3-part YouTube series of how I leverage Docker and then eventually move to the composite actions. So I encourage you to check that out. Like and subscribe. Also, if you're watching this on GitHub's YouTube, like and subscribe there as well. And then sort of rounding the bases as well. If you're interested in finding other ways you can sort of over-index, optimize your plays, your structure, your DevOps automation, check out Sarah Drasner's repo, which is Awesome Actions. There's a lot of examples there that you can sort of just get your teeth in, get your hands clicking and copying and pasting, because I'm a big fan of copy and pasting. So definitely check that out. Also, shout out to the Learning Lab, lab.github.com. If you just want to build your first action, start there. Build your action and then apply, copy and pasted code from Stack Overflow or from my repos. And then, move on from there. And then finally, I just want to bring this up because I made a joke about Michael Jordan's baseball career. And I think this is kind of missed a lot in history because Michael Jordan, he played for the Farm League, for the Chicago White Sox. So he played in Arizona and he played in Alabama. And then his career sort of ended abruptly and he went back to basketball. And the only reason he quit was he moved on is because the MLB actually, they went on strike. So he wasn't doing anything. So then he started playing basketball. Anyway, long story. What I'm getting at is that Michael Jordan is actually on the cusp of transcending the game of baseball. he brought that same level of creativity and an excitement, enthusiasm to baseball, and just by applying the same practices to that sport. So definitely go back into history, rewatch all that stuff. Highly encourage that. But also take that same things that you can transition your repos and open source those. Apply that to your stuff, and copy and paste if it's licensed. All right, so I'm B Dougie, I'm Beyonce Advocate, and actually, I'm really curious if y'all have any questions for me.